welcome to meeting number 112 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage. I would like to acknowledge that this meeting is taking place on the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people.
Meeting that we're having, as you can well see, we have a lot of people sitting out there in Netherlands, and so most of them have been tested and they're connectable and connected. And as I'm going to say the usual housekeeping things, while the Board of Internal Economy does not mandate that we wear masks, it's advisable if you're not well that you consider your colleagues and wear a mask. Now, for the witnesses, we have a very powerful audio system. And I would like to ask you if you have any devices that are sitting around your mics, etc., to move them because they could create feedback that could cause a problem for the interpreters. Similarly, and for those of us who have it, let's move it away from our mics. You cannot take pictures of the proceedings. It'll be on public line. You can get it later on if you wish, but you shouldn't be taking pictures right now. That's not allowed. And so now, one final thing, each group is going to get 5 minutes to present. If you're a member of a group, you can decide who's going to do that, 5 minutes. If you're an individual, you have 5 minutes. I will give you a 30-second shout out and go like 30 seconds, and it means you should wrap up what you're saying, because you will get an opportunity later on when you're being asked questions by the members to be able to elaborate and expand on what you didn't get to say in your presentation. So noted about that. Any questions and comments to be made should be done through the chair. And that's it, I think. That's about it. So we will begin. This is a study on the media that has been brought forward by our esteemed colleague, Monsieur Champoux. And we are on the last meeting today, so the people who were not able to attend, we're not going to be able to hear from them, but they are going to hopefully present us with written presentations so we can read it as we do our report. Now, I will begin as an individual with John Gormley, lawyer, retired radio talk show host, and former member of Parliament, and he's coming on by video conference. Mr. Gormley, for 5 minutes, please.
Madam Chair, committee members, thank you so much for the opportunity to present a few thoughts. I think my remarks timed to 5 minutes and 15 seconds, so I'll try to get them well and succinctly delivered. Gosh, time has flown. I chaired the predecessor to this committee, the Standing Committee on Communications and Culture, in 1988, so albeit very late, it's good to be back. It's a challenging time for some in the media, and many observers saw this coming. In the 1980s and beyond, media ownership structure, erosion of local newsrooms, technological convergence, the impact of the internet and social media. So should Canada's news sector hold a conference or forum on the future of the media? Well, why not? The more voices and perspectives, the better. Should the government support this forum implies that tax-paying Canadians should pay yet again for more hand-wringing about the media. I'm not for this. Just like I don't necessarily accept the supposition that the Canadian media is in trouble because it's underfunded by government. The government has nothing to do with this. The media is in trouble because it did two things. It bet on a modernized definition of journalism that backfired and lost audiences. And secondly, it whistled past the graveyard as the internet and social media developed the technology to migrate content and revenue away from the media, which was entirely predictable given the behavior of large Canadian media organizations. I've recently wondered, where would the media be today if the federal government had done nothing? No local journalism initiative, no journalism labor tax credit, enhancements to the periodical fund, or even embarking on the Online News Act. Does any of this, or all the money in the world for that matter, nudge the media toward innovation, adaptation, and change? For generations, three clear boundaries existed in journalism. There was reportage, accurate, unbiased, neutral, factual chronicling of what happened. There was editorial commentary featuring opinion perspective, the expression of diverse and divergent opinions and voices. And for those media who could afford it, There was investigative and in-depth work, which often revealed wrongdoing, forced accountability, and advocated change. The legacy media and their wire services intentionally blurred these distinctions and decided that agenda-based journalism would replace balance, factuality, impartiality, a freedom from ideology and bias, and a divestment of personal opinions and agendas. With this came a laser-like focus on social justice, climate change, drug use harm reduction, intersectionality, race, colonialism, and gender politics. And the media became so preoccupied with allyship that they stood up for and defended certain causes rather than scrutinizing and reporting on them. Not surprisingly, this change in journalism challenged the public's traditionally high level of media trust. In part, people no longer believed the media was in it for them as neutral observers dedicated to truth. And a rational response for news consumers was to vote with their feet and seek alternatives. At the same time, the internet had developed with astonishing pace and scope that by the second decade of the 2000s, social media flourished, consumer choice was vast, and the legacy media struggled for audience, advertising revenues migrated, and the die was cast. So today, why does the government bear responsibility for the media's miscalculation? If this was a crisis like rebuilding a destroyed hospital or damaged vital infrastructure, by all means the government should step in. But the roles and function of journalism and the modern media are still evolving. They're being redefined. And there's a risk government gets in the way by subsidizing inefficiency and not incentivizing the necessary change. Even the legacy and the new media lobbying for government money and accepting it does little to enhance confidence in their independence or reliability. So does government funding pay for better journalism? Does it restore credibility and trust? Does it create new models for telling our stories and delivering important information? Does it drive toward financial sustainability or simply postpone the inevitable? Government funding does not incentivize news organizations to make better decisions. It doesn't compel the media to make subscriptions viable or develop micro subscriptions where consumers pay as they go, or advance philanthropic supported journalism, donor member funding models, or nonprofits. President Ronald Reagan famously summarized an old political joke from the 70s by sarcastically observing, "The 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help." I respectfully suggest that policymakers carefully examine what, how, and who they're trying to help in this case. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. You went exactly 15 seconds over, and I allowed you because in this committee we kind of allow some leeway now and then. So thank you, Mr. Gormley. And now I go to Tara Henley, who's a journalist, an author, and a podcaster. Ms. Henley, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon to the committee. Thank you for inviting me to participate in your study on a national forum on the media. My name is Tara Henley. I'm a journalist and author in Toronto, and I am the host of the Lean Out podcast, a subscriber-supported weekly current affairs show that interviews guests from around the world, including many journalists. I myself have been a journalist for 22 years with experience in newspapers, magazines, digital, radio, and television, as well as publishing a current affairs book. For the past year, one of my central lines of inquiry at Lean Out has been on the collapse of the media, and I have interviewed researchers, authors, historians, and professors, covered reports, journalism panels, and forums, and have read a large volume of email and comments from the public and have spoken with journalists in both legacy and independent media, as well as opinion writers across the political spectrum and media entrepreneurs. I am currently writing the 2024 Massey essay on the state of the media, published in the Literary Review of Canada this spring, and the focus of that essay is on declining trust in media. As this committee has already heard, the problems facing Canadian media are complex and multifaceted, and our newsrooms are under enormous pressure. We know the collapse of the Canadian media is largely economic. The internet has disrupted our industry, and the advertising business model has imploded. We have also heard from witnesses at this committee that the industry faces challenges with ownership and consolidation. We have seen mass outlet closures, dwindling audiences, and mass layoffs, and by some estimates, there's now just 10 to 12,000 journalists in this country. A government intervention in the industry has also presented challenges for some players, including independent and digital outlets, and has resulted in Meta pulling out of news in Canada. We heard powerful testimony on that from Media CEO Brandon Gones. The media is in a profoundly weakened state, and there are consequences to this. Good journalism involves revealing inconvenient facts, airing unpopular perspectives, and challenging dominant narratives. The volatility of our industry risks breeding conformity and caution, both in leadership and in our press corps, which can erode the quality of coverage. In the current climate, the training for the next generation is also jeopardized as there are less mentors, less outlets, particularly less local news outlets for journalists to train at. And an important point is that the economic precarity of journalism means that young people without family financial support are less likely to go into the business and to be able to live in the expensive cities where our media is now concentrated and do internships and poorly paid jobs. This reduces the diversity of perspectives in our newsroom at a time we most need to increase it. As the industry is collapsing, public relations is exploding. Cecil Rosner, formerly of the Fifth Estate at CBC, notes in his recent book that journalists are now outnumbered by PR professionals by a ratio of 13 to 1. So we in the media, we are not just facing catastrophic economic and structural pressures, we're also grappling with a serious decline in public trust and a citizenry that is increasingly tuning out from the news and is increasingly hostile towards journalists. These are all major problems for maintaining a robust and healthy press. So I very much support the idea of a national forum on the media, especially one that would have meaningful participation from the public. If we want to save the Canadian media, we're going to have to listen to the public, and we're going to have to forge a journalism centered on the public interest as the public understands it, as witnesses Sue Gardner, Jen Gerson, and Colette Bryn have already persuasively argued before this committee. I do not believe the government should have a role in facilitating a news forum, and I especially don't think it should fund it. In my view, any funding from the media or from the government that flows to the media at this point would hinder our attempts to rebuild trust. There is evidence to suggest subsidies have created an environment in which segments of the public believe the media has been bought off by the government. We heard this view at committee from Unifor's Lana Payne, who said her members face complaints that they are a tax-funded mouthpiece for the PMO. And we know from a 2023 Angus Reid poll that most Canadians, 59%, oppose government funding of private newsrooms, believing it compromises journalistic independence. I do want to be clear, I do not believe subsidies result in direct editorial interference, but that doesn't mean they don't impact trust. As an industry, we have a duty to insulate ourselves from the power that we are meant to hold to account. Media derives its credibility from its independence from power, particularly government power, and maintaining public confidence in that independence is of paramount importance as maintaining the independence itself. We must contend with the public perception of government funding and understand it likely erodes trust. Unfortunately, at the exact moment that the Canadian press most needs to rebuild trust. Without trust, we have no audience. Without an audience, we have no revenue. Without revenue, we have no path forward for the Canadian media. And without the media, we do not have an informed electorate and a functioning democracy. So the Canadian media does need to be saved. That is very true. But my message is simple. The government cannot save us. We have to save ourselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I now go to Ms. Bolt. Is Ms. Boltman ready?
Oh, she is?
No?
So we can always...
Or can I go to Ms. Andrews? I'll go with Ms. Andrews, Sarah Andrews, Director, Government and Media Relations.
They're from the same organization.
The two of them are from the same organization, so okay. So we have, what are we going to do with Ms., those are our last two witnesses.
So
We can suspend so we can do a sound check with those two witnesses, if you don't mind. It means you can go get a cup of coffee and a glass of gin or whatever is down there. I ask for gin, but I never get it. I ask every week. Yeah.
I'll bring a motion.
didn't bang the gavel, but do I have to?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me okay?
I was waiting for
Yes, we can hear you.
to run
Okay,
out
great.
to the-
Thanks very much. Are we back in session now?
We are back in session. We're beginning.
Okay,
Mr. Jolly, for 5 minutes, please.
thank you. Thank you to everybody on the committee here to provide me with the opportunity to explain to you my view on the current crises, and I use the plural here, facing the Canadian media industry right now. Je vous m'adresse aujourd'hui en tant que
I come to you today as president of the Canadian Association of Journalists. For those of you on this committee who don't know, the CHPC is the national voice of Canadian journalists in all media, representing more than 1,000 members across the country.
For nearly a half century, the CAJ's mission has been at the forefront of providing members with high-quality professional development training opportunities and to engage in public interest advocacy work that supports the right to know of all Canadians. This includes subjects such as access to information, transparency, public disclosure, and ensuring that Canadian journalists are free to exercise their constitutionally protected role to report on matters in the public interest. Given that I have limited time and to offer the opening remarks, and in light of some of the outstanding quality of testimony that's already been offered by witnesses to this committee, I'm going to refrain from rehashing everything that's already been read into the public record. So my reason, though, for attending and wanting to speak with you today is to present a rather clear and unequivocal message that many Canadian journalists, or many journalists in Canada, I should say, are hurting. We're hurting financially as salaries do not keep up to inflation or when staff positions are replaced by internships or not at all. We're hurting emotionally, oscillating between the challenges of navigating an increasingly hostile world while trying to ignore the deep feelings of anxiety about what the next so-called cut-down day, when it will come. It's a reality. It's a proverbial sword of Damocles that hangs over our collective heads. We're also hurting developmentally as professional development budgets have been slashed. I mean, just think, talented musicians need to practice. Olympic level athletes spend hours in the gym and developing robust dietary regimens. Journalists, too, need training to ensure that their skills are kept sharp in order to navigate an increasingly opaque and hostile world. But training, unfortunately, has become a luxury and not a necessity. Je vous mets au défi d'imaginer un
I challenge you to imagine a profession so essential to the proper functioning of democracy, where the conditions for those on the front line of the battle between truth, lies, and disinformation are so difficult.
Seldom does a week go by when I don't speak to journalists who have played the game the right way, only with their hands to be left palms to the sky, trying to figure out what to do next and why they're continuing to devote their life to the craft of journalism. But right now, I can also say at this very minute that there are hundreds of early career journalists who are working in communities across the country as part of the local journalism initiative. Rather than thinking about their next assignment, I suspect many of their minds are on whether they will have jobs come April, as funding has not been renewed as of yet. It's code red, and I hope you hear the alarms sounding. Tout en appréciant l'intérêt de ce comité à
While I appreciate this committee's interest in organizing a national forum on the media, I fear that, as Mr. Champoux pointed out a few meetings ago, this undertaking comes 10 years too late. Alas, time is running out.
The future of journalism is predicated on making tough choices, perhaps unpopular ones. But to appropriate an old baseball metaphor, it's better to go down swinging than being caught looking at strike three with the bat resting on your shoulder. I look forward to a healthy conversation with members of this committee this afternoon, and I'm happy to provide some insights on potential actions that could be taken.
Thank you, Mr. Jolly. And I think we will go to Ms. Andrews for 5 minutes, please. Ms. Andrews.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, committee members. Friends of Canadian Media is a nonpartisan citizens movement that stands up for Canadian voices in Canadian media. From public broadcasting to news, culture, and online civil discourse, we represent hundreds of thousands of everyday citizens from across the country who want to protect and defend Canada's rich cultural sovereignty and the healthy democracy it sustains. I'd like to start off by acknowledging Parliament's most recent actions. Bill C11 and C18 triggered considerable debate, but together these policies represent a necessary and vital impulse to do something, to act rather than to acquiesce, to react to the eroding impact that foreign tech companies are having on our news, our culture, and even our democratic health. When it comes to news crisis, many shrug their shoulders and suggest there is nothing to be done, that the crisis represents the irresistible march of time and technology, that we are powerless to act, and that the public doesn't even care. But that is wrong. Every day, our supporters tell us how much they do care and how deeply concerned they are about the future of the news sector. They feel what's being lost, and they want better, and they're not alone. Recently, polling we commissioned shows that for all the downsizing and derision, Canadians still turn to so-called traditional media to get their news. 73% of adults said they deemed news from television, radio, and newspapers to be trustworthy and reliable. By contrast, social media was trusted by only 30% of Canadians. Sadly, nearly 80% of Canadians felt that it's getting more and more difficult to know what is and what is not true. This last statistic should come as no surprise. With a relentless pace of news layoffs, editorially rigorous and trusted journalism is increasingly being replaced by misinformation and disinformation. Some of it is just sloppy, some of it is ideological, and some of it predatory trolling for profit. Some of it is outright malicious and even dangerous. So here we are, knee-deep in a Canadian news crisis. But perhaps it's time to focus less on the result and more on the cause. Because if we follow the money, it's clear that advertising revenues have fueled this crisis in the news. Au cours de la dernière décennie, les GAFAM comme Meta et Google se sont imposés dans nos...
Over the past decade, companies like Meta and Google have made their way into our daily lives. These platforms are increasingly coveted and have used their global reach and unfettered market advantage to cannibalize advertising revenues. Not only have we allowed them to do this, we've encouraged it. Currently in Canada, advertising purchased on foreign digital platforms is considered a tax-deductible expense. In 2018, when we published our study Closing the Gap, we estimated that $5 billion worth of advertising was being extracted from our economy. We need to fill the gap and encourage advertisers here to choose homegrown platforms. But we can't stop there. Programmatic advertising has spawned a veritable economy of misinformation, in which toxic content is fed by a near constant flow of advertising dollars. This disinformation economy is worth several $billions, most of which ends up in the pockets of Google, which systematically ignores its own standards and practices designed to ensure that digital ads are not placed on sites offering extreme content and ideas. We can take action by imposing transparency and accountability requirements that would help redirect advertising dollars to reliable sources of information, away from those whose business models allow them to profit from amplifying violence, hatred, and misinformation. We must also provide CBC Radio-Canada with a sustainable funding model. It is the only broadcaster required by law to produce news in all regions. But unfortunately, it is crumbling under the weight of chronic underfunding, compounded by a freeze in the last federal budget. As private broadcasters continue to withdraw from news production, especially local news, our national public broadcaster must have the resources to fill the void and fulfill its mandate. What's more, a better funded CBC Radio-Canada could reduce its dependence on advertising.
Before we wrap up and address any questions you might have, we want to answer this committee's central question about whether there is a need for a wider study of the Canadian news ecosystem. Our answer is a definite yes. But while that study is taking place, we do encourage Parliament to turn its focus to the advertising economy and its tremendous impact on our news, our culture, and our democracy. Canadians are looking for you to take this task, and we urge you to move swiftly and to take a big swing, because the half measures have brought us here to a news crisis that may quickly become a democratic one, and that would be unacceptable. Thank you for this opportunity to speak with you today.
Now, I want to go to the question and answer component of this meeting. And so there are some rules here. Basically, you're going to get questions from a representative of each political party, and I'm going to give them a 30-second shout out when the time is finished. The first round is a 6-minute round. The 6-minute includes the question and answers. So I would like everyone to exercise their journalistic skills and their parliamentary skills and be as crisp in terms of your questions and answers as you can possibly be. Thank you. And so we begin now with the Conservatives. And the first person for 6 minutes up is Rachel Thomas. Rachel, you've got 6 minutes.
Thank you to each of you for joining us. It's nice to have you here today. My first question goes to Ms. Henley. I was reading an article that you drafted not too long ago, and in this article, you stated the following, and I'm going to quote you directly. You said, "I don't think any government program can ultimately save the news media unless the public was willing to allow news to become a permanent ward of the state." I believe you expanded on this a little bit in your opening comments, the fact that government involvement breaks trust with the public and ultimately isn't a long-term solution for the viability of news media in Canada. But I'm interested in this statement that you've outlined here. You say that if media, you say that any government program cannot save news media. Unless, of course, the public is willing to allow news to become a permanent ward of the state. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Thank you very much for the question. The quote that you have referenced, I don't actually recognize from my own work, but the sentiment I certainly agree with. Basically, I think that the intervention of the government in our industry has caused more harm than it has done to advance the interests of the Canadian press. And I think that at this point, we need to look at what the media can do to save itself. And I have some ideas on that. First of all, I think the necessary precondition is for the government to end interventions in the industry. And I would encourage Parliament to think along those lines. I think that at this point, we need full competition. And in order to have full competition, we need that to change. I also think that we need to have a reform of the CBC. I do believe we need a strong public broadcaster, particularly in this moment. But in order for the CBC to fulfill its role in society, I think it's important to have a mandate review. And I would like to see some of the changes suggested by my colleague, Jen Gerson. I would like to see the CBC refocused on local news, on investigative journalism, on filling the gaps in the market that are difficult and expensive to produce. I would like to see the CBC reorient away from competing with digital innovators and move towards supporting them. And there's lots of ways they could do that. I think they could play a vital role in training the next generation of journalists, as to some extent they already do. I also think the CBC could use its facilities to allow training journalists to make podcasts. And I think the CBC could play a really important role in the digital innovation that's already underway and that needs to continue and to stop being a commercial entity that is competing against these startups. I also think that there needs to be a vast experimentation in business model. We're already seeing that to some extent. We're seeing startups like Substack, which is the platform that I'm on, being very successful at monetizing journalism. And, that we're seeing Paul Wells, for example, and Jen Gerson at The Line use that model to much success. We're also seeing innovation in terms of charity model. The Hub is one that stands out. And I think you're going to see a lot of hybrid models going forward. The other thing that I think needs to happen is that we need to look to other markets for inspiration. And on that front, I would refer the committee to a book called What Works in Community News. It was just recently out, and it's full of success stories across the U.S. And lastly, I have 4 specific suggestions for media. I think we need to decentralize. I think we need to utilize remote work so that journalists journalists can work in their own home, small communities and not have to move to Toronto. I think we need to stop hiring for university degrees. I don't think they are necessary, which would also expand the pool of talent and perspectives. I think we need to increase ideological diversity within our press corps, and I think we need to vastly increase public participation. I think we really need to hear more and listen more to the public about what it wants us to do and how it wants us to serve the public interest.
Thank you, Ms. Henley. That's quite the list. I appreciate your attention to detail and offering those solutions to us here today. I want to turn my attention to Mr. Gormley and just thank you for joining us here today. Now, interestingly enough, you mentioned that you're a former member of Parliament. You served here in the late 80s, but you didn't mention your background in news. I'm not sure if you would wish to just summarize that quickly. Now, also acknowledging that you are here as an individual today, but certainly with a breadth of knowledge that comes from the newsroom. My question for you comes from your opening remarks, and you said this. You said there's a risk that government gets in the way by subsidizing inefficiency and not incentivizing the necessary change. I'm hoping you can expand on that. You have about a minute.
Slightly under a minute, Mr. Gormley.
Thanks, Ms. Thomas. Yes, I was born and raised a radio journalist as a kid in high school, then university, then a assistant news director, news reader, writer, beat reporter, then a talk show host, then a member of Parliament, then a lawyer, and then back for 25 years as a radio talk show host in Saskatchewan. So I've been blessed since I was 17 to have experienced everything from how newsrooms operate, how to strong opinion perspective media works in what I've done as a talk show host. Innovation, adaptation, and change, at the risk of sounding as sensationalistic as I accuse many journalists of sounding, I really don't wonder if there has to be a fundamental reconstruction. I must confess to being
Excuse
an
me,
unrequited
Mr. Gormley,
fanboy
I am so
of Tara
sorry.
Henley.
Mr. Gormley, I'm
So
sorry.
Substack,
You've
yeah,
run out
the
of
model would
time.
be
Can you
Substack and
elaborate on that in another question? I'm sure you'll get another one, so can you elaborate on your thoughts? Hold those thoughts. Thank you. I'm going to go to the next person. That's the Liberal Party. We have Talib Nur Mohammed for the Liberals. 6 minutes, please, Talib.
Thank you very much to all of you for being here. And in something that will seem uncharacteristic for me on this committee, I'd like to pick up where Ms. Thomas left off, if I could, and start with you, Ms. Henley. I'm really interested in sort of your thinking around the fact that there should be no government support for journalism and news. And I find it interesting that you would say that because a lot of organizations, including True North Media, Post Media, and the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, who are sort of no fans of government, have very actively taken advantage of public funds. So I'm curious, when you talk about the diversity of viewpoints, you talk about the different perspectives, how it reconciles with the fact that very vociferous critics of the government have certainly not become wards of the state, quite the opposite, and in fact use that government funding to say things and do things that would be diametrically opposed to what, quote unquote, a ward of government might want. So I'm wondering if you could share your thoughts on that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for the question. I think you're absolutely right that there are outlets who have taken advantage of the subsidies, who have still maintained strong criticism of the government. I think that is a fair point. I would like to say, though, that I think with regards to government funding, that really the final judge of whether the government funding is appropriate is the public. And we are seeing strong signs from the public that it's impacting public trust. And so I've heard this in interviews. I've heard this from professors. I've heard this from experts in the industry. I've heard this from fellow journalists, that frequently what the feedback that they're getting on social media is exactly what we heard from Unifor, that media is a mouthpiece for the PMO. And so I'm also hearing that as well from the public over and over and over again. So I think that the defining factor here is public feedback. And I think we really do need to pay attention to it.
So I think that's interesting because I think there are those that would say that True North is a mouthpiece for the opposition, right? So I mean, I think this storyline cuts both ways. I'd like to go to Mr. Jolly for a moment, if I could, and then follow up with, I believe it was Ms. Andrews, if I could, with the following question. You've heard one of your colleagues say that government should get out of the business of supporting news and journalists. You represent journalists. You represent, in some sense, organizations that are trying hard to deliver journalism and news in a complicated environment where I think we can all acknowledge the media has not moved as quickly as it can to be adaptive and to look at new ways of communicating with Canadians. How do you respond to this? How do you respond to the idea that government should get out completely of the business of supporting journalism, particularly when you think about rural communities, Indigenous communities, the North, so on and so forth?
Well, to be pretty brief, I think any idea of abandoning that is pretty facile and doesn't really understand the economics of how journalism works or how Canada, has traditionally operated. I look at the United States. California's introducing bills to support local journalism. Illinois, New York State, Utah, I believe there's another one as well. I could be mistaken. This is across, in the UK, there's the BBC, Nordic models in Scandinavia have all, relied on some sort of government subsidy to exist. I mean, I think you can make an argument, and it's a philosophical one, that sure, the government can get out and let, the survival of the fittest, ultimately prevail. My recommendation is there won't be much left to support our democracy, and then we're going to devolve into a nation of TikTokers and YouTubers who are there not communicating stories in the public interest, but are just looking to profit off of whatever rumor is going around the internet. I think that's pretty clear based on my understanding of things.
Thanks, Mr. Jolly. If you could, Sandra, same question.
Definitely. So I think, first of all, there's not just subsidies. When we talk about government intervention and parliamentary intervention, we're also talking about actions that have already been taken, like C18, for example, where it's not a subsidy from the government. It is, in fact, the government intervening and correcting an imbalance in the market. So I think it's really important to look at where the tools in our toolbox where we can intervene and not provide a direct subsidy, but sort of correct those market imbalances. And as I mentioned in my opening remarks, closing the loophole in the Income Tax Act is one of those opportunities. And we're very happy to hear that the Heritage Minister is actually taking a further look into that. But of course, we come back to the CBC as well as the public broadcaster. The parliamentary appropriation is such an important part of the CBC's budget. And in fact, we at Friends of Canadian Media would advocate for the CBC to be fully funded by the parliamentary appropriation at some point in time. I'm glad to hear from Ms. Henley, and I completely agree that we need to have the mandate review for the CBC, and we're very much looking forward to the work of the advisory committee in the next little while to see how we can get the CBC to be the best it can be and how it can make the most of that parliamentary appropriation.
Thank you. And now I'm going to go to the Bloc Québécois. For 6 minutes, please, Martin Champoux.
Merci, Madame la Présidente, et merci.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being with us today. I would like to start by specifying that I believe that for all the meetings that we've had on this study and the Forum on the Media, we're not recommending that the government would fund or coordinate forums. I just wanted to reassure our witnesses who shared concerns about that. The goal of this study is to see how the field could carry out a forum on the media and how the government could support something like that, but it certainly wouldn't be responsible for organizing it or directing discussions. I just wanted to be very clear on that. Ms. Andrews, I would like to thank you for the data that you shared with us. How many members are part of your group? we don't have specific members, but we do reach about 300,000 Canadians by email, phone, regular mail, and you receive a positive response in general because these are people who like the media, and I know that you've been working hard for years in the field. And so I find it very interesting that you're sharing the data. You talked about the Gandel Group study and the matter of trust, the public's trust in the media. We can see that there's still hope. Trust is not completely gone. But in your view, what do you believe that the media industry should do? How should they behave to rebuild trust? And if the government and governments are to play a role, what should that role look like? That is a very good question. Are the media the problem? I think it's the presence of disinformation and fake news, which is what people are seeing increasingly on Facebook and Instagram. As I stated in my opening remarks, we want to focus on problematic ads that fund disinformation and misinformation. This is a way for parliamentarians to take on the issue. Also, encourage media models that still have the trust of Canadians. For example, La Presse, which you may have seen in the survey. They are the francophone media outlet that have maintained the most trust of Quebecers. CBC for Anglophones is the most trustworthy news outlet. And so investing in public broadcasters is important, ensuring that CBC Radio-Canada has a presence throughout the country, especially in smaller communities, and to ensure that funding is there for CBC Radio-Canada. Mr. Jolly, I would like to come back to something that concerns journalists, and you represent a great number of them. What do you think of comments of former journalists that chose a new business model? They have a digital model that's similar to commentating, and there are sometimes too many ads in the newsroom. What do you think of these people and the state of legacy media, the state of information? We hear as a comment that it's their fault for not adapting with new technology. So what do you think about these comments? I will respond in English because it's quite technical. No problem, Mr. Joly.
You know, what we need to really understand here is content in the grand scheme of things. Opinion's cheap. It doesn't cost a lot to produce. I can rip off an opinion column in an hour and a half. I have an idea. I think what is really more important, and this is something Monsieur that from the FPGQ mentioned, he cited some information around the costs of production of, you know, a simple story or a medium, a slightly more complex story or an investigation. And when I had a chance to look over that information over the weekend and was quite surprised by it and thought it was a really good piece of research to actually identify for Canadians that good news and quality journalism costs money. Opinion, you know, I'm interested to hear what people think, but I don't surmise that is the be all end all, because there's a lot of context that often gets omitted in opinions, and people aren't properly informed by just thinking about what an opinion columnist says.
Par exemple, Madame. Ah, je vais faire ça vite, Madame la.
I'll be very quick, Madam Chair. Thank you.
The New Democrats, Nikki Ashton for 6 minutes. Nikki.
Thank you, and thank you to our witnesses. My first question is to Ms. Andrews. We've talked a lot about or heard a lot about the role of government in the media. We know that government in recent years has allowed and approved the buyout and mergers we've seen of major media conglomerates, Rogers Shaw, the expansion of Bell Mobility, et cetera, et cetera. I've referenced before, we could describe the media landscape in Canada as three media conglomerates in a trench coat. And the reality is that this kind of oligopoly has been allowed to exist with government support and approval. What we've also seen is that these major media conglomerates only turn around to cut hundreds, if not thousands, of jobs. And the recent Bell Media cuts are an indication, leaving regions without news outlets and contributing to media deserts and leaving Canadians on the hook. Do you think that the current media oligopoly is a problem in Canada? The fact that that there are so few major media conglomerates that are running the show?
I'm going to give you the short answer first, which is yes, and then I'll expand a little bit on that. When you're part of an oligopoly, you expect oligopoly margins on all of your business lines. But the margins on news content can't remotely compete with what companies like Rogers and Bell are seeing on their wireless and internet revenues, particularly when it comes to local news. So one of the reasons they're earning these high margins on wireless and internet is because they are an oligopoly and there is very little competition. This creates a totally unrealistic expectation that news, particularly local news, can or should earn similar margins. So it's like a bad feedback loop. Notwithstanding this, private media companies have acquired and merged their way to a position of dominance in broadcast news as a critical public resource. And then when they still don't get the same astronomical margins they get in wireless and on the internet, the result is cuts and closures. This is equally concerning. What is equally concerning is the fact that giant corporations like Bell and Québécois are now trying to completely get out of their current regulatory obligations to provide news. In fact, just after C11 passed, they started to make the case to reduce their obligations through the implementation of the Online Streaming Act. So the fact that these companies have been allowed to become an effective oligopoly and earn these high margins actually creates a corresponding obligation on them to protect and preserve news and journalism, given the critical role it plays in preserving our democracy.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. And I want to go to a specific question on the CBC. I appreciate the note that you made, as well as Ms. Henley, around reviewing the mandate of the CBC. I represent a part of the country that's been abandoned by the CBC, despite commitments to greater coverage for Indigenous communities, regional representation. It's been years since we've had a stable presence from the CBC, something that is part of their mandate. Particularly here in Manitoba. But I want to get at the question of cuts to the CBC more broadly. It seems like we regularly open the news to find out another major media company is shuttering their doors, shutting down local coverage. Recently, the CBC announced that due to the Liberal 3% cut across the board, they would be forced to cut its workforce by 10%, reducing CBC Radio-Canada employment levels to lower than even the Stephen Harper years. Deeply concerning. Can you discuss what these job losses will mean for the media industry moving forward?
I think you touched on a point that hit a nerve with a lot of Canadians. Everyone was very frustrated by the job cuts that we heard back this fall. And we were angry, particularly because we felt that these were avoidable. This is part of, and I mentioned this in our opening remarks, this CBC has been chronically underfunded. And that chronic underfunding has been compounded by the 3.3% budget freeze. If you look at where Canada ranks amongst similar OECD countries, we rank 17th out of 20th when it comes to funding for the national public broadcaster. That breaks down to about $33 per person per year. That's not a lot of money. So along with the Bell job cuts, when it comes to journalism, we're really at risk at seeing the new kind of news deserts in broadcast journalism that we're already seeing in print. And that really will impact smaller communities because private broadcasters are increasingly abandoning them. And if you look in many cases, the CBC is the only broadcaster when it comes to local and regional news. I think, for example, Prince Edward Island, the CBC is all they have. So we really need to start talking about long-term sustainable and predictable funding for the CBC so it can really live up to its public service mandate to Canadians. And that conversation has to happen in tandem with the mandate review to ensure that the CBC does live up to the local news requirement. As you may be aware, Friends of Canadian Media filed a review of the CBC's broadcast license conditions because the CBC had requested to lower its requirements when it comes to local news. We've challenged it on those grounds. We're waiting for the hearing from the CRTC. We're hoping that it's going to happen in the next little while, but we really want to push the CBC to provide Canadians in all the communities with the local news that it's supposed to.
Yes,
Great,
and
Nikki,
great to hear
you've
that.
gone over time. I've let you go a little bit.
Okay,
A
thank
few
you.
seconds, but there you go. Now we're going to go to the second round. The second round is a 5-minute round. And so we begin with Jacques Gourde for the Conservatives. For 5 minutes, please, Jacques.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first question will be for Mr. John Gormley. I will allow him to continue his response to my colleague Ms. Thomas's question.
Thank you, Monsieur Gourde. I was in the midst of saying I'm an unrequited fan of Tara Henley's and have followed her work in the last 2 or 3 years. And I think what you hear from Tara in many respects moves us to where I think we're heading. And at the risk of sounding crisis and apocalyptic, we may well be in a position here that buggy whip makers and farriers were in when Henry Ford rolled the first Model Ts off the assembly line. There could well be, for example, on large corporate broadcast ownership. There has to be a compression between senior management and content. There has to be, and I see a world where hyper-local, website-based, what many weeklies are doing now in smaller Western communities that have a multimedia product. I see a networking of that. I see a Substack type model of network providers. The old idea of the radio broadcasting station may work if it's hyper-local. CTV knows nothing about running radio stations, and recently even less about TV. I mean, how do you cut your noon news package? How do you cut other things and leave only your supper local? So I think we may well be into the kind of corporate and content reorganization that has to be bold, it has to be dramatic, and unless we're prepared to get government out, I just don't think news is going to adapt and innovate as it has to.
Merci. Ma prochaine question.
Thank you. My next question will be for Ms. Andrews. You talked about the paradox of CBC Radio-Canada. I know more about Radio-Canada because they are francophone, but CBC seems to be having issues with their ratings or their listening ratings. Is it a programming matter or competition? That's a good question. In the francophone market, there are only 2 or 3 broadcasters, TVA and Québécois, and there's a new Bell Media one as well. Radio-Canada is very present for francophones outside of Quebec as well. For CBC, we hear from our supporters that there are shows that they enjoyed, but CBC had to face a lot of competition for ad revenue, and that's because of the underfunding. And so these are more commercial issues. And so perhaps these shows are less popular for Canadians, but reviewing the mandate is so important to recenter CBC Radio-Canada and offering services to Canadians and to share news. And I'll use 3 terms and I'll say them in English.
Enlighten and inform, donc d'éclaircir de divertir et d'informer aussi les Canadiens.
Merci. Ma prochaine question est pour Monsieur Joly.
My next question is for Mr. Joly. You talked a lot about journalists and poverty and the lack of training, that it's a luxury, and that this forum on the media is 10 years too late. Can you tell me why it's 10 years too late?
It's getting to the point where something needs to happen. We need some action. Otherwise, I see a generation of journalists coming out of journalism school not sure what the future is. You know, I was talking to a colleague who's the same age as I am, and we couldn't believe what we were hearing from some young journalists currently in J school or running community newspapers, and the challenges of getting a job. And I think that has an ultimate brain drain. It creates a democratic deficit when people, you know, Ms. Henley was talking about the amount of people, PR, citing Cecil Rosner's book, the amount of PR people who are, you know, going that direction with their career instead of journalism. I think it creates an ultimate huge problem for our democracy in the long term.
Thank you, Mr. Joly. And now I will go to the Liberals for 5 minutes. Mr. Coteau.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you so much to all of our witnesses here today. I appreciate all of your perspectives and views. The last meeting we had, there was a discussion around different types of models that can emerge out of, you know, this new age of journalism and just news in general. We heard about not-for-profit models. We heard about changes with, you know, more localized approaches. And maybe I can just ask, I'll start with Mr. Joly. Have you heard through your the many journalists that you represent of new models people are talking about, models that people are exploring? And if so, can you share those with us?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there aren't people who aren't just exploring them. There are people who are actually doing them. And there are several. I mean, there was a great piece in the Globe and Mail a couple of days ago about journalists going about it in their own different way. You know, they talked about Czech News on Vancouver Island, which is sort of a co-op owned by, you know, the people who work there. There's the Narwhal and others who have, you know, RJO status. So they are registered charities in accordance with, you know, changes to the Income Tax Act and things like that the government has implemented over the last little while. So they can issue tax receipts. And I think that's huge. I'm also the chair of something called the Investigative Journalism Foundation, which is a new outlet where we are a not-for-profit newsroom. And we're growing. We're hiring more and more people all the time because we're doing public service work and focusing on data and looking into how we can use SHIRT grants and different opportunities to build out data sets and things like that that have historically not been taken up on. I think what I would say broadly is for this forum, everybody's at a bit of a different position. And I think if we're talking about what the future looks like, I think we have to account for that because I don't think there's going to be a one-size-fits-all solution to these problems. Look at, for example, what La Presse is doing, you know, and you heard about that last week a couple of weeks ago in the last round of testimony. They're making $13 million, I believe, was their bottom line in the black. This can happen. I think what we need to really figure out is what are the common denominators and how do we incentivize different kinds of.
Okay, I'm going to jump back in because you know I have a limited time, but I do appreciate that response, and you know I do believe you know my colleague who moved this motion to the study. I think there's value in looking into the future of journalism, the future of news, the future of you know a really important piece in our democracy, Mr. Gormley, you said that really government should, and I don't want to misrepresent you, so correct me if I'm wrong, but the impression I got is that government should stay away from news in general. But we've heard from many witnesses that there is a role for government. It could be through providing incentives, you know, through advertising dollars. especially when it comes to local news. We know that the models that are out there today are just really taking away from the local response, the ability for local news to get out there, because there's really no investment through advertising. We're hearing about these different models, cooperatives, not-for-profits, tax changes. These include, government being part of this process, and I believe that government is can be used as a tool for the greater good. We collectively as a society come together, we form governments, and we look for ways to better the world around us. And there's many examples of that. I would assume that your perspective is a bit different from Mr. Jolly's. Would you reflect on the fact that that government can play a role? We've heard some examples. Would you just respond to your perspective on that? Because I find it interesting that there's there's some contradicting perspective from some of our witnesses. Thank you.
Well, sure. Thank you, Mr. Cotto. I won't speak for Mr. Jolly, but certainly I've taken the position. I'm not saying no room for government anywhere, and you've identified tax policy, which can be a much finer surgical approach, particularly on modeling what we want delivery to look like. So is it philanthropic? Is it nonprofit? Is it a pay-as-you-go kind of micro subscription? Is it subscriptions like we have now for Substack? Then we turn back to local. And my experience, and this is interesting, when we tend to look at local, we think of local cities, often 50, 60, 80, 100,000. In small rural local communities, there is, through the radio stations, through local weeklies, very much integrated online products that actually are deriving advertising revenue. They're doing a multimedia approach.
Thank you, Mr. Gormley. Perhaps we can continue that thought in another question. Thank you. I've got to move
Thank you so
now
much.
to the Bloc Québécois. Martin Champoux, 2.5 minutes, please, Martin.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. J'aimerais vraiment que...
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wish that we had 2 extra hours for these meetings so that we could hear more from our witnesses. What they have to say is very interesting and very relevant. Ms. Andrews, I'll ask you a question with my 2.5 minutes. I believe that you are probably the most neutral representative among the witnesses today. Ms. Henley stated it earlier that in the future of the media, we should ask the public what they want. Henry Ford stated that if he had done what the public expected, he would have invented a horse that ran more quickly. And so, yes, we have to listen to what the public has to say, but what should the public's role be in this study that seeks to re-examine the media? That's a very good question. Perhaps a middle ground. We can consult people. I'll talk about a campaign that we will be launching for CBC Radio-Canada. We're going to survey our members and see what the future of CBC Radio-Canada should be. We will share this information with a committee that's being created. Is this direct participation? Not necessarily, but it gives Canadians the opportunity to be heard, whether it be through newsletters or to send in their comments and to see it in a report. I think it would be an interesting way to know what the issues are that they see with the media and to take that with a grain of salt afterwards and incorporate it into a study. That's very interesting. That I think it is essential that they be a part of the process. Do you believe that we should review the whole model of journalism and the fundamental criteria that define journalism? Or do you believe that this should be at the heart of our discussions? I'll continue with you, Ms. Andrews, because of my limited time.
Thank you.
Je vais offrir une personnelle.
What concerns me with talking with a lot of Canadians about their opinions is that people don't necessarily understand what journalism is. So public opinion should be taken with a grain of salt. But to have members of the field of journalism talk about journalism, I think that would be very important. Thank you very much. And Madam Chair, I'll take a few extra seconds to ask the other witnesses if they would like to share their answer to that question in writing, because I'd love to hear what they would have to say. Thank you.
If I don't hear any objections, I think that we could allow you that privilege, Mr. Shampoo, since it's your motion. And you did give up 1 2-hour slot already. So there we go. So perhaps we can hear a very quick answer from everybody else. So I'll go with Mr. Jolly, a quick answer.
I think what the government can do, or parliamentarians, I should say, not the government, focus on news literacy education. And that's different from media literacy. That's not how to use your iPhone and what platforms to go, but it's about the mechanics and the study of what journalism is. What is a lead? Why do you have both sides? Why do you not have both sides? The mechanics of it. I think that is foundational and something we need more of in Canada.
Thank you. Ms. Andrews. You spoke earlier on. Ms. Henley.
Yes, I think Ms. Andrews has made many really thoughtful and important points already in the committee today. On the point of taking what the public has to say with a grain of salt, I would strongly disagree with that. I think it's actually an anti-democratic impulse to say that. I think that the foundation of democracy rests on the idea that we trust the public to take in information and to make its own mind up about that information, and then to decide what, if any action needs to be taken. And so I do have faith in the Canadian public. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Henley. Mr. Gormley.
To amplify only on that point, I had made a note. The public supports, patronizes, and is loyal to a media that is relevant to them, that's aligned with their view, not of issues, but of the way we order our society, and that gives them value. And once the media gets back to that, we don't need meetings on the crisis in the media, but we have to create an environment where that happens. And the public matters.
That's great. And now I'm going to move to Nikki Ashton. Nikki, for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. My question is to Mr. Jolly. I represent a part of Manitoba that's 41 First Nations, 3 large urban centers, numerous rural communities, and in terms of the media landscape, an absolute desert. We've got 4 newspapers, most of them hanging on by a thread. As I mentioned earlier, the CBC has abandoned us. We have a very active radio station in our 3 urban centers that goes above and beyond. I'm talking about the CFAR network, but the reality is grim here. Our newspapers rely big time on the work of reporters supported by the Local Journalism Initiative. It is the way our communities hear news that come from other communities, our province, Winnipeg, dare I say, Ottawa, the faraway place. But the reality is that our newspapers rely on sharing the work of these reporters. We know that more than 400 local journalism reporters are serving more than some 1,400 local communities. How important is it for this kind of support to continue?
I worry about what kind of news deserts would look like right now without the LJI. There are so many small news organizations right now who are hoping and praying and waiting for some acknowledgement and understanding about what's going to happen with this program. There are hundreds of journalists who have moved to places like Churchill, Manitoba, or the Pause because they had a job there. If they don't know if they have a job in April, what are they going to do? Are they going to work at Home Hardware? I don't think that is really befitting of treating people with professionalism. I think it's about time we decided, is this program going to continue? I hope it does, and I hope we hear something from officials pretty shortly about where it's going to go, because if we don't have it, the information deserts are going to be cataclysmic.
Thank you much. 4 seconds left. Nikki, any last great words? No? Okay, so I'm going to move then
Thank
to
you.
the Conservatives. For 5 minutes, Kevin Wall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And first, to Mr. Gormley, congratulations on your semi-retirement, I would say. 25 years as a radio broadcaster in our community, Saskatoon and Regina, Saskatchewan, is duly noted, especially talk radio. You certainly built up a loyal listenership. And, and this committee hasn't talked much about radio. They're more concerned about the CBC and more concerned, in that direction. But I want to get your take on local radio because many have reached out to me in this country. We have not in Heritage even discussed the radio airwaves and where they're going. Would you comment on that?
That's a great question, and thank you very much for your kind words. Depending on ownership structure, when Bell cut loose 4,800 employees 3 weeks ago, a senior vice president mentioned that the radio model was broken. And I said to a friend that I dearly wish I could sit down with some of the people who as recently as 2 months ago were my employers, who have done very, very well by intensely local radio, and what they would think of Bell's model. I think at the local level, radio presently has done very well. Now, is it radio that will one day end you up in Toronto? Yes, if you work hard, but there will be thousands of young journalists who may not proceed past Red Deer. So, like anything else, and I with respect, not get into the idea that, one is entitled to a job if one goes to J school. Radio is a very, very competitive regime. I think radio models that, again, are intensely local and reflective of the community and prepared to drive a model that's also on the web, also is multimedia, also has local ad revenue. I think radio is doing much better, particularly outside the larger cities.
So you mentioned no local journalism initiative, the LJI, no journalism labor tax credit, and maybe the Canadian Periodical Fund, eliminate that. What would the media look like, in your estimation, if we got rid of those three?
I don't know, but I do know what it looks like today. And I see the question of loyalty and trust and engagement with audiences being lower than they've ever been. And that started, I would argue, with the media doing things differently, but certainly it's lost at least 10 points in the latest Angus Reid survey by the perception that the media is in on something the government is doing. And again, way before I was a radio talk show host who was paid to have opinion and perspective, I was that journalist who took great pride in nobody knowing what I thought of anything. There was such a strong sense of neutrality and asking tough questions. I couldn't fathom what it would be like to go to work every day knowing that listeners thought my company, left or right, in answer to the colleague earlier, doesn't matter. You're taking money from the government? I'm sorry. Sorry, Mr. Waugh, I don't know what it would look like, but I wish we'd had the opportunity to see it, because I think we would have found innovation and adaptability much more quickly.
Yeah, media does not adapt. You were in it, I've been in it, and it's interesting because, in CTV you did mention it's regulated by Toronto, if you don't mind, and that's why you have decisions made of getting rid of 45 radio stations, eliminating noon television casts, eliminating late night, eliminating weekends, eliminating holidays, and it's too bad. But I'm going to turn it over to my colleague now, Ms. Thomas, as she has something that she would like to bring up. Thank you.
You have 35 seconds, Rachel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That won't be a problem. I wish to move a motion. So at this point in time, having indicated that I wish to move a motion, I'll just say thank you so much to the witnesses for being here with us here today. I do realize that this is a bit disruptive, but unfortunately, the way that committee is structured, the only opportunity that we have to move a motion is when we're in public, which is when we have witnesses. So the motion that I wish to move is as follows. According to the 2021-2022 and 2022-23 public accounts, the Department of Canadian Heritage has issued transfer payments to the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council in the sum total of $600,000 and $569,353 respectively. And that the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council awarded a February 2022 connection grant in the sum of $24,999, in which the main applicant and speakers at the conference for which the funding was granted have publicly expressed anti-Semitic views, including calling for a global intifada and support for the designated terrorist organizations in Canada. And that the Department of Canadian Heritage has confirmed the implementation of an anti-racism declaration as a condition of funding in their grant applications. And that the Government of Canada has committed to the Canada Anti-Racism Strategy. So given all of this, the committee invite the Ministers of Canadian Heritage and Innovation, Science and Economic Development for a minimum of 2 hours each to discuss the repeated and systemic awarding of grant funding to individuals or organizations expressing anti-Semitic views. That the committee recommend the Government of Canada immediately conduct a whole-of-government review of grant applications to include an anti-racism declaration as a condition of funding, and that the committee report its findings to the House. Madam Chair, the reason why this motion is so important to move today is because the University of Alberta, a group within the University of Alberta, was granted this money. We know that anti-racism in Canada is on the rise.
Excuse me, Ms. Thomas, you're speaking to this motion now. So what I would do is I would tell the witnesses that they're free to leave, and I want to thank them for their time and their very interesting commentary on the study that Mr. Shampoo had brought forward. So please, you're free to go anytime you like, and we will continue the meeting with Ms. Thomas taking the floor with her, discussion on her motion. Thank you. Now, go ahead, Rachel.
I'm just not sure why the grab.
Because I wanted to let them know that they could leave now. That's all.
It just usually
because I noticed Mr. Jolly is still here. Mr. Jolly.
Yeah, no, I'm okay. I'm interested in the motion.
Okay, all right, good. You know that you don't get to weigh in on it, do you? Know that?
I'm a total dork.
Great.
That's
All
okay.
right. Good stuff. Nicely. Okay. Go ahead, Ms. Thomas.
Okay, well, welcome, Mr. Jolly. Well, thank you, Chair. I appreciate the committee accommodating this. We know that anti-racism in Canada is up. And we know that it is particularly alarming, I hope we do, that it is particularly alarming when there is government money going toward the support of that. And I think that's very disturbing. And so I've been contacted by citizens from across the country, as have my other Conservative colleagues. And so finally, we've decided that we are going to act on the information that we've been given and advocate on behalf of Canadians, and in particular on behalf of the Jewish population, the Jewish community here in Canada. There is no place in our country for anti-Semitism. And for $25,000 to be transferred from the government of Canada to a group that is known for furthering anti-Semitism is absolutely alarming. It's appalling. It's disgusting. And so there needs to be an investigation. There needs to be an understanding of what took place here. And it should be noted that this is not the first time that this has happened. We've been here before, haven't we? Laith Marouf, a raging anti-Semite who is incredibly vile in the comments that he made online, was granted $133,000 through the Heritage Department. Of all things, he was granted that money to run anti-racism training. I mean, the hypocrisy could not be more rich. And to this day, the government has not recouped those dollars, even though they claim they've tried. And so you have this individual who is out there, who continues to be a raging anti-Semite, and has $133,000 from the Canadian public to help further his cause. And then now, to make matters worse, there's this organization or this group of anti-Semites who are now they did conduct a 3-day conference at the University of Alberta, and their speakers have anti-Semitic content all over their social media pages. I have it right here. These are just a few that I printed out. 1 page, 2 pages, 3 pages, 4 pages, 5 pages, 6 pages, 7 pages. And there's multiple posts on every single page. And these folks got $25,000 to host a conference at the University of Alberta. I don't understand how any member around this table could be okay knowing that government money went to support something like this. So it's incumbent upon all of us to get to the bottom of it. And the way we get to the bottom of it is by asking the ministers to come to this table and answer for the decision that was made. If we want to understand this further, the University of Alberta hosted this conference in February on 3 different Fridays. They called it Meditations of Racial Capitalism Conference. And then they brought in speakers, as mentioned and as shown, that have this history of making anti-Semitic comments. One of them even called for a global Antifada. I mean, this would never be okay. But then you look at it in light of October 7th and what happened, and I think it just makes my skin crawl all the more. I mean, you have members, who took the stage at this conference, who took a key place, who are advocating for the support of organizations that we've declared as terrorist organizations. One that Canada hasn't, but the U.S. has. Surely we at this table are not okay with this type of conduct being perpetuated in our country. Surely we will choose to take a stand against that. I'll speak to this a little further. Some of the content that is held within these pages that was found on these social media pages is the following. So you have, one of these speakers promoting and sharing resources from a Canadian-listed terrorist organization, including the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. You have others publicly celebrating or supporting Hamas's attack on Israeli civilians on October 7th. That's disgusting. That's disgusting. You have others sharing support for the Houthi movement in Yemen. That's crazy. And then you have another who signed a petition supporting an anti-Semitic professor at the university who is being fired for his vile views and spreading them. And this person was coming to his defense. And here we have it. This conference is sponsored by the Government of Canada, logo, full on. And this money came down from Heritage and then went to the council and then went to the University of Alberta, to this group of individuals, I should say, through the University of Alberta. And so I think for the government's funds to be used in order to provide a platform for such conduct, for such vile remarks, it's just wrong. It's just absolutely wrong. And so, again, my plea to the committee would be for us to take the time to understand this more. Interestingly enough, we had the minister here with regards to Laith Marouf. In fact, we've had the conversation a couple of times, and promises have been made and promises have been broken. The latest was this. The minister sat here and made a commitment that no dollars would be given out without thorough investigation of those that they were being given to. There was a vow made that that same type of funding mistake with Latham Roof would not be made again. That there would be this lens applied to the application process in order to make sure that another anti-Semite or someone who perpetuated hate against any group of people would not be granted money from the government. And yet, here we are, approximately 6 months later, and we're having that conversation. We're staring at into the face of the problem again. And so I guess I pose a question to the government, and that is, what will it take to make sure that we're not here again? What will it take to make sure that we are not perpetuating any sort of hate, but especially anti-Semitism? I mean, Jews are the most prosecuted group in Canada. For crying out loud, I would hope this government would want to do something to remedy this. Conservatives are offering an opportunity to do that. We're offering an opportunity to have the ministers here, an opportunity to ask questions, and an opportunity to get to the bottom of this. The motion asks that there would be, that both of these ministers would come, the Minister of Canadian Heritage and the Minister of Innovation, Science and Economic Development. The motion says that they would come for a minimum of 2 hours each, and that they would discuss the repeated and systemic awarding of grant funding to individuals or organizations expressing anti-Semitic views. As mentioned, this has happened before, but we certainly should make sure that it doesn't happen again going forward. And it's the folks at this table that have the opportunity to hear from those ministers and to make change, or to recommend change. It's ultimately up to the ministers to make the change. They're the ones that have to implement the programs. They're the ones that ultimately have to do better in terms of their review of applications for grant funding, and looking into these folks and the types of, vile beliefs that they might perpetuate. It would be my hope that the government in the future would not find itself in this situation. But I think the way that we make sure that that doesn't happen is, as the opposition party, of course, is we generate accountability. And the way that we generate accountability is by moving a motion of this nature, and asking for the ministers to come and to answer tough questions, and for that to be on public record, for Canadians to be able to hear and understand what took place here. As mentioned, this is something that I have heard from Canadians from coast to coast on. It is deeply concerning to them, and of course, especially from those who belong to the Jewish community in Canada. So it's my hope that my colleagues would join with us in supporting this motion and in generating change, not only for the current time, but for the future of our country and the grant monies that are given out in the coming weeks, months, and years. I say that, but we'll have a Conservative government pretty quick here, and there will definitely be some significant change then. So hopefully for the next few months that the Liberals are in power, we can generate a bit of change and hopefully prevent from making this mistake once again. So with that, I'll ask for the members across the way to support this motion and to vote in favor of accountability, to vote in favor of transparency, to vote in favor of equality among all people, and to vote against racism, discrimination, and anti-Semitism in our country.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. Mr. Shampoo.
Merci. D'abord, oui.
Oh,
Yes.
I'm sorry, Martin, you're after Ms. Landsman.
All right, well, I won't be long, Mr. Shampoo. So it's never a pleasure to speak to a motion like this, but it is important to support a motion like this from my colleague, and thank God for her and her willingness to hold this government to account, because it's promise made, promise broken every single time. And this is the latest piece of information after months and months of seeing in this country, in every city across the country, in every large city across the country, and even some smaller communities, people taking to the streets, vandalized synagogues, shots at schools and temples right across the board, particularly in the Jewish community. So it's important that we get to the root of this because leadership actually comes from the top, and never have I seen a government break the consensus, a long-standing consensus in this country about its position between principle and popularity, choosing to side with barbarism and terror, frankly, choosing to fund those who espouse those kinds of views. I want to read into the record because I think Canadians need to hear this, but it's $25,000. This is, of course, after this committee has sat here questioning the former failed minister of responsible for diversity in this country under the guise of under the minister of heritage. Both now have moved on. I would expect that the committee would like to give an opportunity to this minister to clean up the mess of the last minister and actually hold this department to account to make sure that funding doesn't go to things that are called Mediations of Racial Capitalism Conference. It's a 3-part series here aimed, I'm going to quote, at the racial character of capitalism in complex intersections with structures of settler colonialism, anti-blackness, heteropatriarchy, and empire. This is according to a website promoting the event on February 9th. So if that doesn't sound, that doesn't sound insane to the folks at home, it's deeply concerning that the government would fund this kind of conference with the speakers that were at this conference, one of whom is pointing on her own social media. This is professor of digital media studies in the United Kingdom. Her name was Francesca Soban. She was one of the speakers, retweeting things from the Popular Front for the liberation of Palestine. This is a designated terrorist group, and we've sat at this committee talking about how this country speaks about designated terrorist groups who have been designated in some cases since 2002. These resources were crafted by an organization called Sami Doom. By the way, they're the same leadership. One is designated a terror organization. The other should be designated a terrorist organization. But I guess that could be a conversation for the Public Safety Committee. But these two organizations share these leaders, and it is the government's money that is going to fund this conference, where people who speak at this conference, the speakers at this conference, are sharing that kind of material. That's just one of them, and I can go through many. But I want to talk about the importance of this at this very time. Before coming to this meeting, I just sat in a room with a number of people, particularly from the Jewish community and across the country, from Vancouver, in Ottawa, in Montreal, in large cities, listening to stories about how they have been targeted in the streets because of what they believe and where they pray and where they go to school and how they look. And then you see their own government, the government of Canada, perpetuating this through funding of people like Laith Maruth, who, again, was here to teach anti-racism, not espouse it. And just for the record, he was given $133,000, and we're still waiting to get $122,000 of Canadian tax dollars back from him. And I suspect that the members of this committee would want to see every single dollar of that returned. We had 2 failed ministers even say that. They brought themselves to say that they're going to retrieve the funds after pretending not to know about the situation for a number of weeks. This is why I think this motion is important. This is why I think that the committee ought to get to the bottom of this and give the new minister, an opportunity to correct the mistakes of her failed predecessors, who have done nothing to ensure that this stuff doesn't happen at Heritage. And it's not just Heritage, by the way. This is happening across departments. And I'm going to say one more thing, that there is, money that comes from all kinds of departments for all kinds of programs during the course of any year. I'll bring up one case because it is a case that was funded by the government of Canada. It is an organization called Inspire. They've been on the receiving end of grants from FedDev Ontario during the pandemic and after the pandemic, and it is the organizations like that who have taken away a platform from speakers. So get this. So they've taken away a platform for a speaker for somebody who served in the Israeli military 30 years ago, who has been a Canadian, who is a champion of feminism and women's rights, and is a celebrated athlete. So you have one organization deplatforming views that they don't agree with, and the government of Canada platforming these vile anti-Semitic voices with Canadian tax dollars. I would expect that the committee want to get to the bottom of this. I'm very grateful for the vice chair of this committee who continues to bring these forward, and I hope that we don't have to come back to this committee every time a grant is given to fund the prevalent anti-Semitism that this government is frankly behind.
Thank you, Mr. Shampoo. Martin?
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I understand the importance of the motion raised by my conservative colleagues, but I'm disappointed by the timing. Doing it during a meeting that I agreed to reduce from 4 meetings to 3, and it's a topic that is extremely important for me and for the future of the media. We had 30 minutes left with very good quality witnesses. We could have continued talking about it, and this motion could have been tabled and debated on during a future meeting. I'm not happy about that. I agree with the idea. With Late Marouf, I think that we need to ensure that recommendations following our study, and everyone was shocked. We were shocked by how things happened, and we required change, and I think that it's completely legitimate that we ask for the government to follow up and to tell us whether or not they followed our recommendations. I think that that is completely legitimate. Now, using an event like this one, that is reproachable, I agree. Giving funding to an organization that has or uses anti-Semitic language, it doesn't make sense that public funding is sent to those organizations. But we can talk about the path taken by those funds. The funds that we're talking about here, $6,000, and I'd be willing to hear my colleagues' comments. It's not money that came from Heritage, the $600,000 and $569,000. We're talking about a motion here that perhaps could have been researched further. But you can correct me if you can show me that this money comes from Heritage. I'm not sure what to do with this motion at this time, Madam Chair. I don't know what kind of urgency we need to give to this study that has been proposed. I think that we should hear from the person responsible for the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. I think they should be accountable, and perhaps after the fact, we could talk about the ministers. Would it be at Heritage, at Industry, Diversity? I think that we're trying to prioritize something that needs a bit more nuance. I'll stop there. I'm curious to see what my colleagues have to say, but just to have verified facts in a motion would be good, to find out that this money actually came from Heritage. or if it came from industry. I'd be curious to know.
This money did not come from Heritage. I don't think that the SSHRARC is funded by Heritage. I think they're funded by ISED. And so the question here is who funded, and is this motion appropriate at this committee? I am going to try and find that out. And so because nobody's sure who funded the motion, I don't know if anybody has any information to offer on who funded this, and is it really Heritage or is it ISED that funds the research councils? As we know, ISED funds research councils. So that is an important question you raised, and so I think we need to get that answer. I don't know if the clerk can tell me. I'm putting her in a difficult position because the motion in itself, even though it was tabled a while ago, doesn't really ensure that it was Heritage responsible for this money. And I think if it is not Heritage, then this is going to be inadmissible in this particular committee. So I just, yes, Mr. Latanzio.
Madame la Présidente, est-ce que j'avais encore...
Madam Chair, I believe I still had the floor.
Okay, all right.
Juste pour compléter sur un autre...
Just to come back on something else, I would like to remind everyone that I don't have anything against the spirit of this motion. We need to be sure that public funding is sent to organizations that will respect the criteria that we set out. But if we open this discussion, we should open it further. There are other groups that are targeted. And I think that it should include other groups that are targeted by hate speech. And we could talk about this once we've found out whether or not we can debate this motion.
I think that's a question that we're going to have to ask. I think I will, Ms. Latanzio, did you want to speak?
Yes.
To answer this question?
I want to
because
speak
I have a list, and you can go on the list, or if you just have an answer to Mr. Champoux' question, I would entertain it. Otherwise, I would have to go to Mr. Lawrence.
Yes, it would be with regards subsequent to Mr. Champoux'
point of information. All right, go ahead.
So, for my part, I too understand that, you know, the spirit of this motion, Madam Chair. But I would agree with my colleague. Up until such time as we don't have the certainty as to who, you know.
Point of order, and I did want to give you the opportunity to respond. I think that was fair, Chair. But it's clear that this is a point of debate at this point. I don't mean any disrespect, but I was next on the list, and you could go on the list.
No, I don't think it's a point of debate. Mr. Champoux asked a question. I did not have the answer. The clerk did not have the answer. Ms. Latanzio says she has the answer, so I'm giving her the opportunity to answer.
I don't have the answer. What I'm saying is that
you don't have the answer.
I do have a point of order.
Okay.
Excuse me. Yes, Ms. Thomas.
Thank you. Chair, when a question is asked to the chair, it is for the chair to answer. Ms. Latanzio just said she doesn't have the answer, and so therefore she is ceding the fact that it is in fact debate.
She told me initially that she was answering Mr. Champoux' question. I listened to that. She now says she doesn't have an answer. So I'm going to rule out of order. I'm the chair, and I think I can follow the rules quite nicely. Thank you. Ms. Latanzio, you'll have to go after Mr. Lawrence in the lineup. Thank you. Philip, you have the floor. Thank you. And I think I don't need you to remind me about the rules. Ms. Thomas, you tend to do that a lot because I know what the rules are, and you second guess everything that people do. Okay. You literally second guess everything. Ms. Latanzio originally said she had an answer. Now she said she doesn't. So I have done the appropriate thing and give Mr. Lawrence the floor. Philip, go ahead.
Point of order. I just, Madam Chair, with all respect, I've had my hand up for a while.
Oh, sorry, Nikki, you're in the lineup. You're coming after Mr. Lawrence. It's you, then Ms. Thomas, then Ms. Latanzio.
Okay.
Okay. I know you're there. I've seen you.
Sorry, point of order, Madam Chair.
Yes.
If I might. A very good question was posed by Monsieur Champoux about the nature of whether or not this would be admissible in respect of the question that he has just asked.
Yes.
I'm sure there's a lot of folks on all sides of this that would like to weigh in on this important conversation. Perhaps we might consider suspending and getting the answer to the question so that we can inform the conversation in the right way, and or if it's not for this committee, for you to ultimately, you will be the arbiter of that. Perhaps we could make that determination once we have the answer to this very important question Mr. Champoux has raised.
That is one of a solution, Mr. Nur Mohammed, that we can do. But I think as I said, I asked the clerk if she had the answer. She didn't. I certainly don't. So perhaps instead of debating a motion that may or may not be inadmissible, I have a request to suspend until we get the answer. And is there any objection to suspending this?
A motion on a point of order, Madam Chair.
I beg your pardon, Ms. Thomas.
Point of order. Mr. Nur Mohammed cannot move a motion to suspend when he himself is on a point of order.
I don't understand your question at all. Why is he on a point of order? I didn't hear him say point of order.
Madam Chair, the floor belongs to my colleague, Mr. Lawrence. So how else did Mr. Nur Mohammed get the floor?
He did not say a point of order, but he was making a suggestion. We can go ahead and be absolute about these things, or we can try to find a response. Nobody's disagreeing with the motion, Ms. Thomas. Everybody's just wondering who funded this,
Madam Chair,
and is this the appropriate place? Philip, yes.
I don't want to. I don't want to talk over you, but I think we can come to a reasonable.
Thank you, Philip.
A reasonable resolution to this. I'm going to make a couple quick comments, and then I think it is advisable to move to suspend if that is fair with the committee. And so I just would like to put this briefly on the record. We are in a precarious time, a time I have never seen in my 45 years on this earth and in Canada, where we have forces of anti-Semitism and I might say as well Islamophobia that are really ripping at the very fabric of our country right now. We do have a government that is putting out legislation that portends to fight this hatred, but in reality of what we see is, regardless of whether it's heritage or otherwise, is funding this hatred. And I think it behooves all of us, not just as Liberals or Conservatives or Bloc or NDP, but as Canadians, to get to the bottom of this. And we're not, this is not a resolution that is of condemnation, it is of exploration. And so I think that it's very reasonable to study this, to understand this, and I think to do it promptly, because we don't have much time. We need to show as a committee, we need to show as a country that we are fervently against anti-Semitism in all of its form. And so with that, I would move to suspend so that we can move forward, hopefully in a quick way, to begin this study and to get to the bottom of this.
Is there any objection to this motion? It's a reasonable one. It's trying to get to the business, make sure it's done properly. So I suspend this meeting. Thank you. Thank you.